Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs. Hi, I'm Sean Reeves with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999. I'm an associate certified entomologist, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990.
Common insects of agriculture. We will cover a small sampling of insect pests that can affect crops, including recognition, life cycle, and where the pest attacks the plant. Insects with a complete life cycle. These insects have 4 life stages: the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. Generally, the larval or worm stage does most of the damage. Insects in this category possess chewing mouthparts in the larval stage. Butterflies and moths. The caterpillar or worm stage of this group does all the damage to most crops. When hatched from the egg, they are very small and eat very little, and early stages of infestation may be overlooked. As the caterpillar gets larger, it is harder to control with insecticides. Therefore, early detection of economic infestations is important. Caterpillars vary widely in color and markings. Experience and training are essential in proper identification. Also, while a few caterpillars feed on one plant, many feed on a wide variety of crops. Foliage and fruit feeders. This group contains more different species of damaging caterpillars than any other. Some feed only on the foliage or only on fruit, while others feed on both. For the purposes of this course, it is not practical to cover in detail all of the more important damaging species. The corn earworm has been selected as an example. The corn earworm is also known as the cotton bollworm, tomato fruit worm, false tobacco budworm, and soybean podworm. It varies from light green to almost black and has a yellow stripe along each side of the body. In this image, you're seeing cornworm larvae showing a wide variety of pigmentation. Corn earworm larvae showing a wide variety of pigmentation. Take a few moments to review this image and understand the different pigmentation of the larva. The caterpillar worm stage can last from 14 to 21 days, but during the summer it will be near to 14 days. The entire life cycle, egg to adult, lasts approximately 30 days, so there may be 2 to 3 complete generations each year. Corn earworms feed on both foliage and the fruit. The more important crops it feeds on and the parts damaged are as follows: corn, ear and whorl, small grains and sorghum, head, soybeans, pod and foliage, tomatoes, fruit, tobacco, bud and other foliage, pepper, fruit, okra, pod, other legumes, foliage, and pods. There are many other foliage and fruit-feeding caterpillars. Some of the most important species are fall armyworm, true armyworm, tobacco budworm, loopers, black cutworm and tobacco, and tomato hornworms. Boring and tunneling insects. This group contains fewer species than the preceding group, but some are very important pests of crops. The length of time that these pests feed on the exterior of the plant after eggs hatch and before they enter the plant is relatively short. A properly timed insecticide application is essential to control the pests while it remains outside the plant and before it begins to tunnel. A few species are controlled by insecticides called systemic insecticides that are absorbed by the plant being attacked. The European corn borer is a good example of this group. Egg masses containing about 30 eggs are laid by the adult moth on the undersurface of the corn leaf. Eggs hatch and caterpillars feed from 10 to 14 days on the exterior parts of the plant. Then they bore into the stalk, where they remain until they mature about 1 inch long. The head is dark brown or black, and the upper part of the body is gray to pink with rows of dark spots running lengthwise. The underside of the body is cream-colored. Tassels, or grain heads, of damaged plants often break over. In heavy infestations, borer feeding may cause the plant to collapse or the corn ear to fall off. European corn borers are important pests of corn and closely related grass crops such as sorghum and millet. European corn borers have been found on nearly all herbaceous plants large enough for the worms to enter. Their hosts include over 200 different plants such as field peas, peppers, and Irish potatoes. Control of European corn borer and U.S. field corn is done with genetically modified corn expressing proteins derived from Bacillus thuringiensis. Controlling this pest with insecticides is difficult. Insecticidal sprays must be applied before the insect tunnels into the plant. Other boring and tunneling caterpillars include the southwestern corn borer, peach tree borer, and several types of leaf miners. Beetles and beetle larvae. Beetles and their larvae are important pests of agricultural crops. In most instances, both the adult and larval stages damage plants. The larvae are often called grubs or worms, and the life cycles of these pests vary from less than 30 days to 1 or more years in length for different kinds of beetles. Beetles usually feed on some exterior part of the plant, such as leaves, stems, or flowers, while larvae may feed inside the plant, on the roots, or on the outside of the plant. The bean leaf beetle is a good example of this category. These widely distributed leaf-feeding beetles are generally of minor importance. However, with high populations, they may damage soybeans by leaf, stem, and pod feeding. Diseases such as bean pod mottle virus can be spread by these beetles. Adults are approximately 1/2 inch long and quite variable in color. They range from reddish to yellowish, with or without 3 or 4 black spots at the inner edge of each wing cover. The outer margin of the wing cover is banded in black. However, all color forms have a black triangle on the central front part of the wing covers. The adult overwinters in or near crop remnants. Adults feed on the undersurface of the soybean leaf, producing rounded holes. When disturbed, they generally fall to the soil surface. Each female lays more than 40 eggs, deposited in groups of 12 to 14 in the soil near the base of soybean plants. Beetle larvae. Beetle larvae are usually referred to as grubs or worms. Larvae feed on underground plant parts, a practice which may cause plant stunning or death. The lengths of the life cycles of these pests are variable. Most require 1 or more years to complete their life cycle, while others require no more than 1 month under ideal conditions. The bean leaf beetle is a good example of a pest that damages a plant both in the larval and adult stages. Bean leaf beetle eggs hatch and the larvae begin to feed on the roots and nodules within 2 weeks. Feeding on the stem just below the surface can also girdle the plant. In about 5 weeks, the full-grown half-inch larva forms an earthen cell, and the resulting pupal stage lasts about 1 week. In some states, there are 2 generations per year. Leaf feeders. Many leaf-feeding beetles are the adults of soil-feeding larvae. Often the adult feeding is not considered to be of economic importance. The Mexican bean beetle is an important leaf feeder. Both the adult and the larva feed on foliage. All 4 stages of the life cycle are found on the leaves of plants. This insect is primarily a pest of legumes. Control of leaf-eating beetles requires a foliar application of a recommended insecticide. Insects with a gradual life cycle. This group includes a large number of different species. Most of them have tube-like mouth parts used to pierce the plant and remove sap. Some inject saliva during the feeding process, which causes a deterioration of the plant tissue. Some feeding damage causes a malformation of plant parts. Others, such as aphids, excrete a sticky material called honeydew. Sooty mold often grows on this honeydew on the leaf surface, reducing the penetration of sunlight and therefore photosynthesis. These insects have only 3 stages in the life cycle: egg, nymph, and adult. There is no resting stage like the pupa. The nymphal stage sheds the skin several times, gradually getting larger until it changes into the adult. Both nymph and adult stages can damage the plant. Pesticides. Pesticides are used to reduce populations of damaging pests. Unfortunately, pesticides sometimes have undesirable effects on non-target organisms. Pesticides should only be used when benefits from such use are greater than the undesirable effects. Formulations and sources of information. Pesticides are formulated as emulsifiable concentrates, liquid concentrates, flowable liquids, wettable powders, soluble powders, gases, dust, granules, and baits. Sometimes it doesn't matter which type of formulation is used, as long as it can be uniformly applied to the area where it is needed in the concentration required for pest control. In some instances, the type of formulation is important. Methods of application. Pesticides are applied in almost every conceivable manner. Spraying is by far the most common method. However, dusting, granular application, spreading a bait, and releasing a chemical that turns into a gas are other methods used. Pesticides are applied broadcast over the entire field, in bands over the row, directed to the plant bud, directed at the base of the crop plant, to the soil surface, mixed uniformly into the soil, and even turned under. The type of application needed depends on the pest to be controlled, the pesticide formulation, and the method that is proven most effective. Often more than one pest needs to be controlled with a single application of pesticide, and a compromise method may be chosen that is the best for the complex, though not as good for one or more pests present. Insecticides. Insecticides are pesticides used to control insects. Most of the commonly used insecticides are classified as organophosphates, carbamates, or synthetic pyrethroids. Additionally, there are a few of the once widely used chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides still in use. They are synthetic organic chemicals and are classified according to chemical structure. Pre-harvest and re-entry intervals. Many pesticides have a minimum time requirement from the last application until harvest, a period which is known as the pre-harvest interval. The reason for pre-harvest intervals is to allow time for the pesticide to degrade, therefore preventing the occurrence of pesticide residues in the harvested crop. Pre-harvest intervals should be carefully observed to prevent harvesting an illegally contaminated product. The pesticide label contains information pertaining specifically to pre-harvest intervals. The pre-harvest interval, PHI, on a pesticide label is a time period following a pesticide application when a crop must stay in the application site and cannot be removed from there. Brokers, co-ops, and other receivers of commodities for processing inspect producers' pesticide application records to determine if PHIs were observed before they will accept the crop. The pesticide labels, directions for use section begins with the statement, "It is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling." The label is a legal document, and this statement is telling the applicator using a pesticide in a manner not permitted by the label is wrong. Harvesting before a PHI expires is illegal. The minimum allowable time between the application of a pesticide and the date workers may re-enter the treated area is known as re-entry interval. This restriction is presently required only for a few pesticides that are highly toxic to man. Re-entry intervals should be carefully observed. Consult the label for specific information concerning re-entry. The restricted entry interval, REI, is the time immediately after a pesticide application when entry into the treated area is restricted. Some pesticides have one REI, such as 12 hours, for all crops and uses. Other pesticides have different REIs depending on the crop, method of application, or the post-application activity to be performed. When two or more pesticides are applied at the same time and have different REIs, the longer REI must be followed. The REI is listed on the pesticide labeling under the heading Agricultural Use Requirements in the Directions for Use section of the pesticide labeling or next to the crop or application method to which it applies. Employers at agricultural establishments must keep workers out of a pesticide-treated area during the REI with only two exceptions: early entry with no contact, or early entry with contact for short-term, emergency, or specially accepted task, which must comply with additional restrictions. Entry into treated areas during an REI is allowed to perform handling tasks as long as the persons entering such areas are trained and equipped as pesticide handlers and receive all other applicable WPS handler protections. What does early entry with no contact mean? After any inhalation exposure level listed on the product labeling has been reached, or any WPS specified ventilation criteria have been met, an employer at an agricultural establishment may permit workers into a treated area during an REI if they will not touch or be touched by any pesticide residues, including on plants, including both agricultural plants and weeds, on or in soil or planting medium, in water such as irrigation water or water standing in drainage ditches or puddles, in air, if pesticide remains suspended after application, such as after fumigation or after a smoke, mist, fog, or aerosol application. Avoiding contact by using personal protective equipment does not qualify as a no-contact early entry. No-contact early entry workers do not have to be provided the special protections required for other early entry workers. The following are examples of situations where a worker would not be expected to contact pesticide residues in a treated area after sprays, dust, and vapors have settled out of the air. The worker is wearing footwear and is walking in aisles or on roads, footpaths, or other pathways through the treated area where the plants or other treated surfaces cannot brush against the worker and cannot drop or drip pesticides onto the worker. The worker is in a vehicle in a treated area where the plants cannot brush against the worker and cannot drop or drip pesticides onto the worker. After a pesticide application that is incorporated or injected into the soil, the worker is doing tasks that do not involve touching or disrupting the soil subsurface. The worker is driving through the treated area in an enclosed cab on a truck, tractor, or other vehicle that prevents occupants from contacting pesticide residues or pesticide-treated surfaces. Phytotoxicity. When a chemical kills or injures a plant to which it is applied, it is said to be phytotoxic or plant toxic. If the plant is a weed and the chemical is a herbicide, the result is desirable, but usually the word phytotoxic is used when a pesticide may injure desirable plants. Phytotoxicity may occur due to drift onto non-target plants, excessive rates, or the mixing of chemicals in a more concentrated form than is desirable. To avoid the problems of phytotoxicity, apply chemicals within recommended rates and follow all label recommendations and precautions regarding the use of that particular pesticide. Residues. The amount of a pesticide that remains after application is the residue. The ideal pesticide would be one that is residual enough to give control of a pest for the length of time needed and then break down completely into harmless chemicals. Unfortunately, this is not the case with most pesticides. The long residual nature of chlorinated hydrocarbons is one of the main reasons they are being used less. A tolerance is set for each chemical that is registered on a crop and usually expressed in parts per million or ppm. The residue that remains on the harvested crop cannot exceed the tolerance that was set when the pesticide was registered by the Environmental Protection Agency. This has a direct relationship to the pre-harvest interval. Label recommended rates should not be exceeded because the pesticide residue may exceed the legal tolerance. Environmental contamination. The long residual chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides are the most likely chemicals to cause contamination of the environment for an extended time period. These chemicals should be used in strict accordance with the label or avoided if there is any alternative treatment. Always use the proper application method when spray or dust applications are made. Non-target injury. Care should be exercised not to contaminate non-target areas when applying a pesticide. This is particularly true of food and feed crops, bodies of water, apiaries, woodlands, and urban areas. Information on the least hazardous recommended chemical to use in situations where there is danger of contamination can be obtained from county extension offices. Drift is probably the chief factor contributing to contamination of non-target areas. Pesticides should be applied when there is little or no wind. Under no conditions should pesticides be applied if the wind speed exceeds 10 miles per hour. Using extremely low volume and air delivery spraying systems increases the problems of drift. Such precautions as spraying when there is little or no wind, using the least volatile forms of potentially harmful chemicals, using drift control agents, and the avoidance of spraying with very small particles will help prevent these problems. Contamination of soil and water. When pesticides are used, care should be taken to prevent unnecessary contamination of the soil and adjoining bodies of water. Select the pesticide that is least likely to cause contamination problems. For example, carefully mark each swath in order to avoid a double application. Some herbicides and long residual insecticides may have a carryover effect if excessive rates are used. This could contaminate or destroy subsequent crops. When bodies of water are in close proximity to the area being treated, select the pesticide that would be least likely to cause contamination of the water. Make applications when there is not wind or when the wind is blowing in a direction that would drift any pesticide away from the water. If the area to be treated is sloping, do not apply the pesticide when heavy rains are forecast. This will prevent washing the pesticide into the water. Insects with complete life cycles, egg, larva, pupa, adult, cause damage primarily in the larval stage, with examples including caterpillars, boring insects like the European corn borer, and beetles. Insects with gradual life cycles, egg, nymph, adult, include aphids and stink bugs, which damage crops through sap extraction. Pesticides, such as insecticides, play a critical role in pest management, but must be used carefully to prevent harm to non-target organisms, crops, and the environment. Proper timing, formulation, and application methods are vital for effective control. Regulatory guidelines like pre-harvest and restricted entry intervals ensure safe and legal pesticide use. Environmental contamination and phytotoxicity are key concerns, emphasizing the need for adherence to label instructions and consideration of non-target impacts. We want to thank the following people for allowing use of their photos to help make this a great course.
Congratulations, you have completed the course. Please proceed to the 20-question quiz. Please drop us a line and give us your comments on the course, pestceus@gmail.com.